So because of systemic issues that we've had already, I felt like, okay, I got some cuffs on me, but I can move around a little bit. I can put my hands together and do these things and make moves to help kids. But when you look at, for me personally, being a relational educator, and you start to consider the different things that are going on in the homes of children.
Think about the origin of schools in the United States. And, I think in particular for indigenous people and African people, or I call them African people, African American, and sort of two different origins of education. For Black folks actually started a lot of schools ourselves as a response to being enslaved for so long, and it was a path to liberation.
When you have special populations, you have to understand that when in education and in a public sector setting, everybody is seen as equal, and my needs don't trump your needs.
The safety point for me is very, very important because of my 87-year-old grandmother who's at home, who is a diabetic, and many other health concerns.
At the local level, we need to be in on the conversations that are happening about what it looks like to reopen the schools, and we need to speak to what the conditions are in our communities.
Welcome to Teachers for Open Schools. I am Stephanie, a New York City educator who is a teacher for open schools. And today I'm excited to have a panel with some educators and experts in the field about how we can get these schools reopened safely and also use it as an opportunity to make those changes that we don't want to just see in education to adapt to COVID, but to bring us into the future of education. So let's just start off by introducing to our panel members. Go ahead, if Dana, you want to start us off and introduce yourself?
My name is Dana Harris. I am currently a 8th grade math teacher. This is my 17th year teaching. I also have an online tutoring business that I've been doing for several years now. I teach in Oakland Unified School District in Oakland, California.
Awesome. All right, Megan, you want to let us know about you?
Sure. I'm a former district education director over special populations, which are severely and profoundly disabled, undocumented, immunocompromised, autistic, behaviorally challenged, and all of the kids who don't really quite fit in the normal mold, showing how to safely integrate them and then monitor and implement compliance measures under full ADA, IDEA, and OSHA compliance, and then matching them with appropriately certified teachers who can handle whatever the learner need or familial need is. And then also on the oversight for matching employees with, if they're immunocompromised or if they have any special needs within the school district, how to successfully integrate them into the programs. And then I have a separate background in containment PPE applications for hazardous environs, which is which masks work when and why, and then the particle physics applications that go along with mask efficacy standards. And so that does have a role in all of this. And there are some really misdirected, well-meaning things that have taken hold that really need to have a corrected course before we can, prepare for a better future for everybody. So,
all right, and then we have Marquise. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Marquise Anderson. I'm originally out of Long Beach, California, and now I'm teaching in Los Angeles and teaching in LA Unified School District, and I'm a history teacher. Also a designer and a visual artist. So I'm working on all sorts of projects. So I do color pencil primarily. And now I'm working on integrating arts into my learning approach or pedagogical approach. So I'm working on a piece right now on the Haitian Revolution. And I'm going to figure out a way to bring that into my teaching. So, yeah.
Awesome. I love it. So we have a lot of different perspectives going on here, but everybody about developing creative solutions to make our school system more resilient for our kids. And so I just wanted to go around, and we'll give everybody a few minutes to kind of more in more detail explain their position and what they would like to see and the things that they're thinking about as we're pushing to reopen schools. So I'm going to start it off with Megan, and then we'll go to Marquise and Dana. So Megan, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that first we need to address the masks themselves, and COVID in particular has different mitigation standards than flu or larger particulates. COVID is a very, very, very tiny particulate, especially when aerosolized. So it's a 0.06 to 1.4 micron particulate. And even the best commercially available respirators and masks that we have filter exhale at 4 microns. And so this is an important oversight because it kills the whole rhetoric of me wearing this protects you. And so we've gone and we need to consider OSHA standards for anything we're requiring within the public sector. The OSHA standard for COVID-sized particulate is an N95 or higher grade respirator. And it's important because in order to require an employee to wear something for a known pathogen mitigation within a workforce, it has to be provided by the employee and the correct PPE grade, worn with a fit test from an OSHA certified professional in conjunction with eye protection. You don't see that anywhere. You don't see that in any workplaces. And instead you have cloth masks, which are non-PPE under OSHA, and surgical, which are expressly not for airborne contagion mitigation because they're porous. They can, if worn for extended periods, you have other microbial challenges and particle friability. So in situations where you have to wear PPE for extended periods of time, you start going higher grade respirators that have their own airline. And so there are some concerns with masks themselves because none of the masks that you see on children filter COVID at all with any efficacy standard to begin with. And that is not good public information to be putting out there when people are going and wearing things and thinking they're protected and then dying from a given pathogen because they were just not given specific enough information. And so when it comes to reopening schools, the whole approach of putting a mask on the teacher and putting a mask on everybody in the classroom is also inappropriate because the masks themselves with airborne contagion can make the spread far worse due to something called forced filtration of droplet into aerosolized particulates, and those small teeny tiny particulates don't respond predictably to gravity, remaining aloft for extended periods. And so then you're left with an 18 to 20 foot radius instead of the 6 foot as droplet falls. And so this whole distancing thing is out the window. If you're in a room with a high enough atmospheric viral load, you're going to get exposed. And so pivoting from that and saying, okay, well, we have some chaos variables at play because the students I served, I mean, I had a 350-pound profoundly autistic child who had a pre-existing biting condition. And I can't imagine what it would be like. It would be absolute torture just for the child who doesn't understand what you're trying to do to them, and the professional responsible for trying to mask this child all day. And so when you have special populations, you have to understand that when in education and in a public sector setting, everybody is seen as equal, and my needs don't trump your needs. And so if I have a parent who's undergoing stage 4 proton therapy for brain cancer, Eloise, go back out. Sorry. I should have locked the door. Circus all of a sudden. So your needs don't trump anybody else's is the point I'm trying to get at. You're all seen as equal under ADA law, under public sector integration law. And so that's what the chaos variable is. You have people who are unmaskable and have every right under ADA, right to reasonable accommodation and public sector access laws, wherein direct threat is not constituted by mere presence even of an actively contagious individual. I didn't make this up. This is our current law. And so pivoting from that and saying, how do we include everybody within the public sector? you create tiered groupings using something called a bubble isolate subset population model with osmotic immigration. So let me explain what that is. So if you come forward and you say, I don't want any added precaution, or you come forward and say, my child has experienced a severe trauma wherein masked intruders came into our home and they're terrified being around masked people. You have to understand there are people who have experienced horrible things in this world. And I've also worked in direct contact with undocumented immigrants, and none of the materials have been available in multiple languages. And so when you're dealing with a public health crisis, it's important that you kind of drop the politics for a moment and get everybody on board, because that's how you end up saving lives in exposure scenario, especially. So if you're to come forth and say, well, we just want to go back completely the old normal way, then you staff them in with teachers who come forward and they identify as that's how they want to go. Now, if you have teachers who say, I need added protection, the home Zoom's working for me, we get delivery options all the time, we do no contact everything, we're just not ready. You match them up with the parents and the families who are coming in and saying the exact same thing. And then you have everybody undergo an honest quarantine period of 8 days, or before coming into physical contact with one another, you have a rapid test performed on the entire group to show that nobody has an actively transmissible positive, which is what matters, at a low enough cycle threshold where you're not just flagging dead viral matter that's 6 months old because you ran your, I'm not going to get into cycle threshold, sorry, that's complicated, but using testing incorrectly can cause high false positivity rates. And so you have to bring all of these variables into one place and say, how do we incorporate the needs of everybody? And how do we make sure that the effort that we're putting into this isn't actually making it worse? Because putting children in these masks that are the woven fiber, we know that during a plosive force generating event within a mask, which is a cough, sneeze, scream, raspberry, there's all sorts of things kids are going to do to be able to put that outward pressure through the mask. And then you have that droplet you were trying to catch and you're further aerosolizing it into smaller particulates. And then you have that in an enclosed setting. And so if you have people who are just like, we're ready to just go back, we want healthy immune systems, we want robust microbiomes, then you just let them. That's what free will and personal risk mitigation is all about. But you also have to respect the identification component of people who, I mean, this has really scared many people. And it's also been completely traumatizing for many people to be so cut off from society that you will see antisocial behavior patterns. But the risks are so much more severe than the bonuses you would get from these forced measures. You've got all of these young children unable to see faces, and our critical language development periods have an expiration date, and our social and emotional development periods have an expiration date. So if you have them for a long period of time unable to see this portion of the face, which does so much, you have to learn teeth and tongue and lip placement for all of your different portions of speech. And then your social and emotional development, a lot of that comes from mimicking the facial expressions of your parents and caregivers. And when they're cut off from that, you're going to have a lot of people coming forth and identifying, thinking that their children are on the spectrum when they otherwise would have just progressed normally. And then you have a much larger remediation body of children who are going to require additional services, and having to staff that out when this is something that was preventable. And there are just way better options that actually provide meaningful protection to your immunocompromised groupings. So that's.
Thank you, Megan, for bringing in that perspective, you know, really stressing our system should provide many options and be dynamic and flexible. And so Marquise, I wanted to switch over to you because I feel like this has a lot to do with how we got connected. And you're asking about like, what's the purpose of schools? Are they actually providing the resources and the freedom that they espouse to? And how can we make sure that is something that is even more in place as we transition back into schools?
Yeah. So I just kind of think about the origin of schools in the United States. And, I think in particular for indigenous people and African people, or I call them African people, African American, and sort of two different origins of education. For Black folks actually started a lot of schools ourselves as a response to being enslaved for so long, and it was a path to liberation. And with indigenous people, schools are sort of a colonial tool. But even so, with Black folks being in school districts across the United States, and us not having a lot of power in local government, and even if you might have a local official elected, I mean, there's still somebody above that person. Black folks are still in a colonial position, Black folks and indigenous people. And then you have people that are, coming from other places, predominant Latino population. Here in Los Angeles, it's predominantly Latinx. You have some indigenous folks and some Black folks. And I think the same might go for Oakland as well. But my concern is that parents and people in those communities don't have enough say in the education system. And so whatever policies are going to be brought as far as opening schools, they're not going to consider our voices and our needs and the leaders from our communities to make the decisions about how we reopen. And so my concern is that, my thing is not necessarily that schools shouldn't reopen as soon as possible, but who's having a say in what that looks like at the local level.
And they don't need to be reopened and just go back to being failing districts like they were before, and being told that that's good enough, because you don't ever get anywhere with communities, being able to rise up and make something different of themselves by just letting them fail. The district that I worked for had D's and F's and state takeovers for 20 years. And no matter what, they weren't getting to the root of what's causing that in the communities. I think that's so critical what you bring up.
Right. So, and that's the other thing, right? In Los Angeles, we have something like somewhere around a 20% infection rate. And it's estimated that 1 in 3 people in Los Angeles County has had COVID by now, 33%. And most and Latino people are the most impacted, right? Because they make up most of the frontline workers. If you go to places where, you have fast food restaurants, and a lot of them have like sort of precarious work. They're the ones who are out doing a lot of the work that you see. And then you have a lot of homeless people in Los Angeles. You have, a high population of homeless Black folks. And there's so much population density. It's really population dense. So my concern is that how do we reopen schools in a way that accounts for all those factors? And do we open schools at this time right now with the 20% infection rate in the county? Or what is that threshold? Where do we wait? How long?
As long as your testing measures aren't correct and you have such a high false positivity rate, which we know we do, you're never going to get those numbers low enough. You have to give people choice, and you have to give them educated risk assessment, because if your 98-year-old grandma lives at home, it might be different than if you are the kind to go out and go to social clubs and be around mixed groupings all the time, and that's important. But it's also important that you're you're talking about, you have a large undocumented immigrant population, and a lot of them in a lot of different places around the country have not had access to they haven't had access to testing. They haven't had access to non-emergent health services. And then they're still going and commingling with the rest of the population. And when the masks don't do what you think the masks do, then, I mean, that's what's driving the spread of this, is people with a false sense of security dropping some of their guards because they think that something they've been told protects them that does. And
Right.
I would imagine LA has the infrastructure to do something like New York City, where we have a testing procedure and we know that the positivity rate in our schools was significantly lower than the general public, and there wasn't spread happening. Like, cases might come into the school, but nobody was getting it from that person who was in there. The positivity rate was just people come into school, have it, we catch it, we send them home. Oftentimes we quarantine the classroom and things like that. Yeah.
Themselves are generally an impossible model. You get one kid flagged positive, and then that teacher and the rest of the class is sent home for 8 to 14 days. I mean, how many you're going to make that go?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we have to work on.
Child classroom, like.
So I would just say, like, Marquise, before we switch over to Dana, you've been talking a lot about like some of the problems and some of the things. Like, what do you actually think it will take, or what would you like to see happen, whether it's you or other significant Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders in the community to have that power? How can we help empower them? How can we help support them and amplify their voices?
Well, I think at the local level, we need to be in on the conversations that are happening about what it looks like to reopen the schools. And we need to speak to what the conditions are in our communities. And if there are any I'm not a scientist, but if there are any scientists who are part of the decisions that decide, on those panels that figure out, what it looks like to reopen schools, they need to take those things into consideration that we're telling them, because we're telling them what we're seeing. Multi-generation families is what a lot of people are afraid of. They're afraid of students who are asymptomatic and who might carry the virus and bring it home to their grandparents, and their grandparents are dying. And that's what people are seeing. So we just want to be part of the process of reopening schools, as far as being part of that conversation, not being shut out of the conversation. When you have, the way it kind of works here, and I'm sure it's probably that way in New York, but you have, me being LA, you have the teachers union, and then you have the district. But I think that you also need people from the community who aren't part of either of those, right? Because although the union represents teachers, the union bargains on behalf of teachers. And then you have the district, and they kind of talk to each other. And I think there's efforts. There's something called Students Deserve that's led by Black folks in Los Angeles. But I think that they definitely need to be part of those conversations around reopening schools, to consider just the different things that we're affected by, right? So even when you think about who's dying the most of COVID, so it's not just getting COVID, it's who dies as a result, right? And Black folks die disproportionate compared to white folks, as well as Indigenous people and Latinx people. So I think that that's something to consider, right? It means that it means that systemic racism also impacts healthcare, right? Who gets what healthcare? They're making decisions about whose lives are worth saving now, right? That's how bad it is in Los Angeles. Literally, like there's so many people at the hospitals that there's not room. And so what decisions are going to be made about whose life is worth saving? How do we make sure that racism is being factored into whose life is worthy of saving? So these are all factors that I think are important to consider when reopening schools. How totally education then ties to healthcare, and how it just becomes a loop. And what I don't want is to exacerbate the problem that already exists. And then the other thing is, how do we, like Megan said, how do we not just kind of come back and say, okay, well, now we're back to school, but how do we rethink what education looks like? And say, okay, we're going to make massive investments in education, and we're going to solve some of these pandemics that educational pandemics that existed before this pandemic. So I'm like, this pandemic is.
Why would you not take this really long break as an opportunity to, I mean, you need to reinvent the wheel in some areas. I'm sorry, but there's no reason that, you know, the district I served had a 90% paternal incarceration rate, and it was largely, you know, non-violent, non-reoffending, and the impact of things like that on communities and children and their education, that path that they're going to follow is not the same as in other districts. And so we have this like highly segregated system that, you know, now's the time to make those changes. And I think also what you've seen is an uprising of teachers and administrators and, you know, school staff who felt really unheard for a really long time. And they finally had something that they could get behind and use that as kind of a tool to be heard, and it worked. And it's unfortunate, you know, the unfortunate part of that is the impact it's having on the far it's gone on too much,
Right.
far too
And
long.
is it really you know, in the short term, it might seem like it's a good power move to, you know, empower teachers, but in the long term, is it actually going to get us
Until
to
you
that
start seeing
place?
the suicide rates of teens, and until you start seeing how, you know, people who really bootstrapped it and got themselves out of, you know, a path of multi-generational poverty, and then they've been robbed of their futures because their entire paths have been diverted, you know, and it's been a pause button that hasn't accomplished anything in the meanwhile. We can go back better. We can go back stronger in a way that incorporates all voices without it costing anything different. It's
Right.
all structural. You know, that's.
So I wanted to bring in Dana, because this is kind of where you and I had our conversation. I was like, you know, how do you feel about schools going back? You're like, yeah, I want to, but it kind of is what it is at this point. I just want, and so I really wanted to address that, because I think that's kind of the most common sentiment around teachers. Like, yeah, there's a really loud group saying we should keep schools closed, and then there's like a smaller kind of loud group saying like, let's open them. But I really think that most teachers, like Megan pointed out, have kind of felt disenfranchised. Maybe they're getting a little power now, but at the same time, we're just kind of like, it is what it is. Like the union, you know, they're not really talking to us. They talk to the city officials and they do what they do. So can you speak to that a little bit?
So first off, let me say I like the different perspectives of Megan and Marquise, because it kind of, that it is what it is comment can go either one of those directions, really. And so to touch on Megan's points, the safety point for me is very, very important because of my 87-year-old grandmother who's at home, who is a diabetic, and many other health concerns that she
And
has.
you should be able to identify and be placed with something that would lower your risk. And I think we're so attached to names on buildings. And if we would just consider that we have all these places, I just want there to be a home for you, you know, where you feel safe and trust.
And to be perfectly honest, I value my grandmother's life more, and I feel safe teaching from home. Now the flip side of that is more on the Marquise side as well, and both of you all made this point. As a relational educator, I feel like so because of systemic issues that we've had already, I felt like, okay, I got some cuffs on me, but I can move around a little bit. I can put my hands together and do these things and make moves to help kids. But when you look at, for me personally, being a relational educator, and you start to consider the different things that are going on in the homes of children that are in homes where they were either lacking enough food and proper nutrition, things like that. Kids that are in homes where they have to endure abuse, whether it's physical abuse or verbal abuse. Kids that are in homes where they have maybe a parent that would love to be more active in their education, but unfortunately they can't because they're in a position to where they have to go work fast food, grocery stores, and
Or maybe they never got that education themselves and they just don't have those tools in their toolkit. I mean, that's what we're seeing a lot with this home learning.
Exactly. So for me, on that side of things, that's the side that makes me say, man, wow, this is really hurting my kids, because I'm thinking about the after effect. And then also moving forward, I agree with everyone. We are in a failing system. That's just my personal opinion. As a math educator, we already had several kids that didn't have a strong foundation in mathematics. We had Common Core come in, which made teachers who, especially elementary teachers who weren't strong in mathematics, and it makes their problem worse. Now Common Core has added a whole nother issue for teachers and kids. So where I had certain issues content wise when school was normal, now that it's making that the tide is rising and making that water deeper for those kids. So for me, like I said, as a relational educator, I am bothered by that. In regards to it is what it is, I make that statement because I have just become adjusted to the situation. We have been out the entire school year. We hear things from the union, we hear things from the district. The district sends an email and it says one thing. The very next day, if not the very next hour, the district comes back and says, "Oh well, no, that's not the case." You know, so it's, I like what Marquise said about the conversations are being had. They're bargaining between the district and between the union, but where are the stakeholders? The biggest stakeholders being the parents, the community members, and those students. I really, it bothers me because Megan, you mentioned kids on the spectrum and those other concerns and issues that they deal with. Um, both physically as well as mentally. And ironically, we were having a meeting yesterday, either yesterday or the day before, and we were talking to our SPED teachers, and we got mixed reviews. For some of them, they said that this was it was helping some of their kids because they were able to get on Zooms one-on-one. But then there were other ones that were talking about those struggles for kids that need that social environment. And that's gen ed kids as well as sped kids. We all need that social environment, and not every kid has a positive environment, as I like to say, BC, before COVID.
Yeah.
So there's so many different things involved in this situation, and I have really adapted the it is what it is mentality, because I'm a person that I don't like to think about the negative side of, I think about the negative side of things, but I don't like to dwell on it. I like to come up with solutions. So my day-to-day work is, okay, let's see, what is the where I'm used to going into the classroom and getting a feel of the energy of my students and knowing, okay, this is a day we need to take and have some wellness time and just talk about their issues, what's going on in their world. It don't have nothing to do with mathematics.
Yeah.
I feel like I now have cuffs and shackles on, and they're chained together because I can't see those things. When I'm teaching a lesson, I can't see the faces, into where I'm used to saying mid-sentence, "Hey, Sean, ask a question." "What do you mean, Mr. Harris?" "I can see the look on your face. You're not understanding what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Ask a question." So
And you don't see the bruises, and you don't see
when you take
you're
that
not,
away from
you're
me,
not, you know, there's no one identifying these young kids out there who come in and say, "My mom hit me in the mouth with a frying pan this morning," because I've been on the other side of that phone call when you're having to be the one reporting that, and it happens often, and the reporting numbers are way down, and that doesn't mean it's not happening.
So my question is to kind of wrap this up here for Dana and Marquise in particular. You guys are both in that LA area. And I would say kind of both to an extent have that, like, it is what it is attitude. Like, I'd like to see more voices, but I'm not sure what I can do. Maybe the best thing I can do is just focus on where I am, making virtual the best I can until the powers that be. But what can I do or we do to support you, to encourage you, to empower you, to be those voices that you want to see, to start going to those meetings, to find other like-minded teachers and push back against this narrative?
Well, first of all, I'm up top in Northern California, and my hat's off to Marquise as an LA educator, because I looked
Okay,
at the
I don't know
numbers
why
again
I had
this
that
morning,
confused.
and their numbers in LA, they make just like the city of LA makes Oakland look like a p, like, you know, a dime compared to a half dollar. That's what their numbers look like. For me, even before COVID, I do my best to keep good energy around me. And so I keep people around me that I can reach out to and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. One of the things that I've been doing at my school is one of the other math teachers in my department, she actually, two of them, they're major voices for the union. And so they keep me up to date on information. But one of the things that I enjoy is the power of the internet. For those people that don't feel, I've been at a school where I felt like nobody cared as much as I cared. One of my mentees is at a school. She's in her third year of teaching, and she's at a school where she feels like nobody cares. She's still in the beginning teacher program, and they made her the department chair, and she feels like she's the only one really believing in these kids. And so it's teachers like that. To me, I feel like they need more of a voice. I am solid in my career. Like I could leave the classroom right now. I'm always going to be an educator. That's my purpose. But I could leave the classroom right now and know that I became a staple. I made an impact. However, I think that what we need to do is to take a page from Marquise's book and encourage the parents to speak up. There were a lot of conversations in Oakland Unified back when we went on strike the year before last, and that was one of the messages that we encouraged the parents. You know, get involved, let them know that how this is affecting you all. And so I think that's who really needs to be empowered, the parents. And that's continuous work, COVID or no COVID.
How about you, Marquise? How can we help empower you to become part of those conversations that you said need more representation from your community?
So I think that I would just want to be part of the conversations that are happening at the local level, and know what those conversations are. You know, there's different networks on social media, and I think I need to tap into those. I'm hoping that the district and the union will, I mean, what they do is they send out surveys, right? But I think it's also important to have conversations and not just have it be a survey of pre-made questions that you're sort of like, you want a certain answer and you want the people in the community to give you the answer that you want. So I think that it's important to have those conversations. And really, I'm part of efforts at the local level, really just to empower people in general. We have also a large gentrification problem in Los Angeles, which also is sort of feeding COVID-19, right? And it just becomes a sort of a feedback loop. Yeah, more people becoming homeless. So that's another issue. My thing is, I think that it's important to not look at education as a separate issue apart from health, apart from home, or apart from the economic situation, and to have all those conversations blend in together. So how I want to be empowered is to bring that perspective that these things are all interconnected. And, to be honest, I don't see our school district reopening before June. I know there's conversations about it, but with 20%
I don't either.
infection rate.
Oakland,
I was just on a conversation with a teacher from Texas, and his school has been open since September, and currently in Houston, they have a 19% positivity rate. And so I talked last week, the video's up on our YouTube channel with Emily Oster, who's out here on the East Coast, and then Jay Bhattacharya, who's a Stanford PhD MD. And their suggestion was that it shouldn't just be one metric. It shouldn't be a positivity rate, and there shouldn't be any particular threshold that reaches to shut everything down. It should be more like a folder of different metrics. And the key one for schools should not be the community transmission rate. It should be the in-school transmission rate, which over and over again across the country has shown to be significantly lower. And we're talking in places where they have, pretty high community transmission rates, but in school it's, less than 1% or something. Because a lot of times what happens is those community transmission rates are taking account of deaths that are happening mostly in long-term care facilities. And so if the deaths are happening in long-term care facilities, that really isn't a threat in any way to students or teachers in school buildings. So that would just kind of like be my pushback on that. But in general, I would love to connect you guys with local groups of parents who are, fighting for open schools and who are really looking for teacher voices and teacher perspectives to understand more fully what it is that we need to reopen schools. So if you guys are open to that, I would love to connect you with those groups.
Yeah, can I make a last point?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So my thing is I'm working within a system, and my ancestors were brought here, right? So I'm sort of like, I have to be part of any conversation that's had. So my thing is, I'm open to schools reopening. My thing is, how do we have this say in what that looks like, and how do we do it so that we're not.
I think parents also need to start having a couple more tools to work with. I think they need to know that, in Florida, for instance, each year there's something called FTE counts you get throughout the year. And the federally allocated dollar amount per head in Florida is $8,400 and some change per student. And then each exceptionality, there's a funding increase. Why aren't you getting that money? Why are these schools staying closed and these parents, having so much of this? Or why, for school supplies or for something in the home, why are there no stipends or anything during this time? You're taking something and you're just completely, there are a lot of people who don't have the extra resources to get their children what they need to entertain themselves for these short periods of time. And a lot of people don't just have baseline enoughness in their lives that they will never have if we continue to just acknowledge, refuse to acknowledge that disenfranchisement. And then the other part is giving them specific information on how to fight back, including things like IDEA, right to least restrictive educational environment. Because if you're going to tell me my child is not welcome simply because they have an exceptionality that gives them an exemption from masking, and you consider them unwelcome in the classroom, well, I hate to break it to you, but the ADA and IDEA have other things to say about that, even with a transmissible positive. We have certain laws in place in regards to the public sector that we're only going to be able to ignore for so long, or they're just going to rewrite them. But either we have laws that we've put in place or we're lawless.
Yeah, and I think as a teacher, we get so caught up in our day-to-day of planning and doing this, and we kind of like know these things are there, but we don't know specifically. So I think that information is so important and really could help empower us to not just like be there at the meeting, but ask the good questions, ask the right questions, and really take the heat to them. I know one thing that we're seeing has been successful around the country, and something that we're really starting to pivot to here as a strategy in New York City is like putting pressure on those school boards. That's not what they're called here in New York City, but that's where like Marquise, Dana, if we're looking for a place to like really show up and be part of the conversations, we have to start booking on our calendar. Okay, when is that meeting? Did I get a spot to say my 2 minutes or whatever it is? What are the questions that I need to make sure are answered? What do I want them to get on record saying? and just start holding them accountable. I was sending out some tweets this morning about a school board person who was on vacation in Florida, and yet she voted to keep schools closed. So just like things like that. So I would really love to stay in touch with you guys and see how we can work on getting you connected with, it looks like Marquise, you're plugged into some networks, but maybe getting them more tied in with some of the parents that are doing, and same thing for you, Dana. So if anybody wants to make any final comments before we wrap this up.
Sure. I can, everything that I've discussed here, including the particle physics applications, of masks, and then the tiered grouping reopenings, including the bubbleized subset populating. I'm on rationalground.com, and then I'm also on Twitter as @MamasaurusMeg. This is kind of my wheelhouse and kind of all I talk about. So I would, love to interact with anyone out there who's just looking for a little direction. So.
Yeah, my thing is, I just want to make sure that we provide educations that are liberatory for all people, but especially I speak as a Black man. I just want to make sure that Black folks, the education that our experience in school was actually liberatory, and that doesn't continue the tradition and legacy of colonialism, and that COVID doesn't add to that. And whether that means that we open schools as soon as it's safe, I'm open to that. I just want to make sure that we're not being thrown into a situation, and this situation is already hampering us and marginalizing us even more. But how do we sort of bring that into the conversation and make it so that add COVID to the issues, to other civil rights issues in terms of how we consider reopening schools.
And where should people reach out to you, Marquise, if they want to get connected?
I'm usually on Instagram at Marquise_Apsol. And I have another handle, Apsol_art on Instagram. So yeah.
And Dana, any last words? And definitely let us know where we can plug into you.
For me, I want to just see kids, similar to Marquise's sentiments, but specifically towards mathematics. I am tired of seeing kids, period, but specifically kids of color falling behind in mathematics and learning and doing mathematics, because I know historically our people were at the forefront of mathematical innovation. And so that's one of the things that I'm charged with. Fortunately for me, because of my business, I'm able to be a dual agent in the classroom as well as in business. So you can follow me on Instagram at Young Gurus, YOUNGGURUS_Math Tutoring, as well as on YouTube, Young Gurus Math Tutoring.
All right, thank you guys so much for joining me here today. We're definitely going to link all of the ways people can get connected to you in that description down below, and we're going to keep fighting for our kids. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you for this too, Stephanie.